Here we are. Another conversation with Brad Ladisaw and Corey Siegel, the S and the L. And dare I say a podcast, but not a podcast.
I was talking to someone earlier. I like your podcast. I do interviews. I don't know podcast. I just got to get over that mental block of calling it that, because eventually it's just gonna be that, and then we're gonna be chatting with the others. I know we had a shout out, Corbin Dooley, Fairgrove Property Management, wants to jump in the hot seat, so maybe we'll get him rocking and rolling here soon, and some others. I don't know. We just got to be ready for the randomness.
Listen, that caught me pretty off guard because we had our first conversation, and I thought to myself, let's just have it be me and you for a little while, and then we got the request, and then I started thinking, no, I'm like, hey, how about we make a list of people, and we do it like a, picking teams and stuff. So whoever gets booted off the island, right? And so Corbin might be the sacrificial lamb for the first one, and then we see if we can keep it rolling with other people in the industry. But
he's not here to defend. He's not here to defend himself. I played golf with him the other day. We're getting on the first tee. Everyone's sharing their handicaps because we're going to do teams. And he says, I'm a 20 handicap. I was like, all right, cool. He steps up and absolutely rips the shit out of the golf ball right down the center of the fairway. I was like, you are not a 20 handicap.
I was. You never know when you play golf with people, right? And when we went to that sim place, I was like, hey, he's got a pretty good swing, Like you never know. A lot of people say they golf and it's recreational, and then they get up there and they're a lot better players than they lead off to be. That's for sure. For sure.
You can't judge a book by its cover with most things,
that's
especially
true.
golf.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect segue into real estate. I'll tell you that much. Ultimately, I was thinking about this the other day. The closing that we're going through, and I think, there's a couple, and it led me to write down on my notes the question to ask you, and the question's a little bit vague, right? So I wrote it last week, and then we were talking today about how you were moderating that panel. So I'll let you run with it, because I know I have my short list of things, but the question I have is very general, right? The general question is, in the real estate space on the lending side of things, whether it's with an investor that we passively have investing through our company, or it's borrowers that we work with, but you can also kind of adopt this to your moderating that you've been doing. What is the biggest pet peeve that really ruffles your mustache and really gets you going? And I know it's general, but when I wrote it down, we were going through a file that we're closing out that I had my biggest pet peeve. So I give you the floor. Give me one or two of your biggest pet peeves. You can put it on the moderating side. You can put it on the investing side, but I'm interested to know what really ruffles your feathers. And before I do that, disclaimer, I may use this against you in the future. I just want to know the ins and the outs.
All right. There's a few of them. I think we'll narrow it down. So we can't close any deal without escrow and title. And from the lender's perspective and me on the back end, the capital allocations, when someone is over the top aggressive on closing timeline, that I know as the sun will come up tomorrow, this shit is not closing for another 15 days. We just got to go through the process, and our goal is to not have anyone waiting on us. But that is something that kind of is one pet peeve of mine on the closing timeline, or in a real estate transaction. It's the unnecessary urgency that some people put on it and slap that ASAP tag on there. As soon as someone slaps an ASAP tag on it, and normally I'm up early, I'll reply to an email at 5:45 in the morning, or I'll do it at 9 at night. Like, I'll reply. But if I get that ASAP tag at like 12:30 on a Thursday on a non-urgent request, that reply is for sure getting pushed to after hours. So that pet peeve number one. Another one is, this one doesn't happen often, but I think it's done out of them trying to help out their clients. And again, it goes back to escrows. There's a lot of great escrows out there, and no one could close without the escrow or title. But when you have an escrow officer that you could definitely tell they were getting the pressure,
Mm.
and their job is not to tell
Oh,
someone how to review a purchase contract
right,
and try and explain the repercussions of missing a closing timeline.
right,
Uh,
right.
they're an independent third party. They are not an attorney. So anytime we have an escrow that is trying to push us to say, hey, well, you're the only lender that requires, a vacant policy on hazard insurance. I can't sit there and say, that's a lie. Or if we don't close by tomorrow, this deal is going to be canceled and fall through. Well, no notice of performance been issued. This is not like the REOs of 2010, 11, 12 when people were actually closing on REOs where, yeah, if you miss that hard closing date, then that deal was off the table.
Yeah,
There's like steps in California, and we have to play a very careful role on not telling them how to do their job,
right.
because they're getting the pressure, and I get it, and those got to be the two I think biggest pet peeves, and it comes out of urgency when it's not urgent, when
Yeah,
someone could just pick up the phone and talk it through. There's no empathy and there's no tone on an email. I sound like an asshole on an email. It's
I know.
direct. So sometimes I have to pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm sorry for that email I just sent. It's going to come across not polite, and that normally eases it. And last pet peeve I have, people showing up late for stuff. I mean,
Mm,
this is just across the board. This is not deal specific, but just
mm,
in general. If you
yeah.
have an 8 o'clock meeting in person, I'm not saying get there at 7:30, but maybe shoot to get there a little early just in case. But don't walk in at 8:15, or take a phone call during meeting. I don't like that either. So, did you hit mute?
There we go. Is that better?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you sound
I
better the
knocked.
other way though.
Yeah, right. Sounds a lot better. I knocked it over. We'll get all the kinks figured out. I tell this story. I think I've told you this story plenty of times. I've probably mentioned it on other podcasts and interviews and stuff. I used to work in international logistics, and so we would communicate with factories in China for the products that we were trying to order. And one of my managers was a very successful lady, but was really direct in her communication. But everything that she wanted to organize was the most important thing in the world. Probably got her to the successful space that she was. But I think it's funny because she would include in all of her emails to the factories overseas urgent request, urgent response, urgently needed. And I just overheard, like, whether it was a story or a phone call, I don't really remember, but at some point the factory called her and had a meeting and over the phone and was like, "Hey, we're just having a little bit of trouble here. Remember, these factories, English is their second language." And they go, "If every request is urgent, then by definition in the English language, nothing is urgent." And like that always stuck with me, right? Because that is so true. I mean, every deal that we work on wants to close. That's the craziest part. I think if I jump in on it's not necessarily a pet peeve of mine. It's just something that I notice quite a bit. That, but it kind of falls into the pet peeve category where, listen, I know agents really grind for their clients. It's very important for them to kind of have the communication and drive the ship, be that value add. There's one thing to communicate effectively, and there's another thing just to communicate. And to me, my favorite part lately, it seems like it's been happening more and more frequently, where agents will jump into a conversation and keep asking me or the client. We'll all get lumped into a group text message or email asking us if we've funded, or asking us if we're closing, or asking us about the timeline. And because you and I and Kristen, we talk all the time and we're very up to date on files, we know for a fact that escrow and title and sometimes the seller is not ready to close. And so I get into this situation where it's like, where do we, as the lender representing a buyer in these situations, where do we cut off our responsibility? Because we also want to provide that value. We want to communicate. We want to be the person that solves all the problems. That's why people will eventually, work with us repeatedly. And to me, at some point we go, you should check with escrow and title. Like that's really where you should be advising this. We'll be ready. We typically are ready when we need to be ready. But right now you're asking me if I can fund a transaction, and escrow and title are not ready. The seller missed the overnight on an overnight package that is required to be received before we can. So when you ask us for an update if we can fund by this date, we just received an email from escrow saying this thing's not going to go until next week. So that's kind of one of my pet peeves. Really is when we, for all of the positives that are involved, you can't, it can't be selective like this. That's why I know it's stuff that we naturally have to work with and be happy that the questions are coming our way. But on the other hand, it's like, when do we cut it off and go like, listen, like, you're asking the wrong person. This is not our problem. We don't need the pressure. It's a process that's going to work itself out. And by the way, even if I could send money today or have our investors wire money today, we wouldn't advise them to do that because escrow and title aren't ready. That's one that's just come up lately.
And I think with that, escrow and title appreciate that approach as well, because us saying
Very
to
true.
follow up with escrow is not a throwing escrow under the bus. It's no, we've chatted with escrow. They're
Yeah.
checking their boxes. They have their policies and procedures in place. And title, they're insuring this transaction and they're insuring our loan. They're insuring title. So they have their boxes that they need to check. And hey, if they're not ready, we can't fund. That's not how it works. And just because I got your loan app doesn't mean loan documents are ready to go out, because shit, you didn't even complete the schedule of real estate. So it's like, I don't know. We'll save that for a
Well,
different day.
yeah, we don't, I'd like to talk about indirectly about deals when we're far past them closing, because then it could be any deal at that point. But I would say, just going on top of that, text messages probably more so than emails can come across brash. So, I always fear that when, if we're not soft enough in our delivery on saying like, hey, you probably should you check with escrow and title, I'm hoping, that the way that I word those messages comes across as, hey, like, listen, you probably should check with escrow and title. We'll be ready, but they're not quite ready, as opposed to just saying like, the interpreted F you, go check with escrow and title. I definitely don't want that to happen. So if anybody's listening, that is,
Yeah, but I think on the front
receive
end
that
too, the way
text.
you handle your files, you're very hands-on with phone calls first, and then you
Yeah.
kind of set that expectation. Hey, we'll be texting. They're not going to be like long essays via text because
Yeah.
my thumbs will frickin' hurt. So they're
Yeah.
going to be short and sweet. They're going to come across maybe a little direct, but you
Right.
could call me,
Right.
have a
Right.
phone call, and I think that's something that we've seen as well. We do for some of our borrowers is handling some of those transactions where maybe the offer is written up as an all cash offer, and then it's switching from all cash to financing. Surprise, we're the lender.
Surprise.
What's the best way you're able to handle that with your borrowers on, of course, the sell side?
The interesting part about that is when we talk to borrowers, obviously we're not agents. And so the question comes up whether I'm talking to borrowers directly, or if they have their representative, their buyer's agent, reach out to us and say, how should I write up this offer? I, 100 times out of 100, will say, here's how we see it on most of the transactions that we get. But if you're asking for my preference is you write it up as a financed offer, but it just includes a clause or a description in there that says it's going to be private money or hard money loan. But you want to get your advice on how you should write up the offer for the buyer from the buyer, because ultimately that's the decision that the buyer and the agent will make. And I think
I'm talking about,
ultimately,
yeah, more so after that. After that, it's already written, and then the
after that,
agent's like, "What the hell's going on?" And
yeah.
what's been the
Yeah.
best way for you to smooth that over?
Oh, have the listing agent call me directly, right? I think either way, whether I call them, can you provide me with their information? I'll give them a call to kind of explain where we are in the process. I think a lot of the nervousness and the uncertainty about what's going to happen when a property is switched from all cash to financing comes from experiences that people have had in the conventional space. I think actually it does not even result in experience that they have, those agents on the listing side, with private money and hard money. Although there are some nightmare stories out there as well. You hear it from agents. I hear from agents all the time. I had a client once get burned by hard money. They're never going to use them again. That's a different conversation. But I think really what ends up happening is a straight phone call of explaining where we are in the process. Typically that request from cash to financing comes well within the escrow period. It's not day one. It's usually closer to the closing table. So the best way for me to head that off, which really should be a conversation that a borrower or the buyer's agent should be having, but we don't have a problem. I see that as a value add. I see that as an opportunity to create rapport with the listing agent, maybe have a relationship with them down the road. But the reality is they want the assurances to go to the seller and explain that, hey, this is a finance deal, but I spoke to the lender. They're going to go to docs tomorrow or the next day. They've already got the appraisal in. Whatever the kind of last check boxes are on the process, your timeline to close is not in jeopardy. It's simply that they're utilizing a private mortgage. This is not the same type of guidelines that a conventional mortgage goes through or a consumer mortgage goes through, because we only deal with the business purpose or investment side of things. So there's two parts to it. One is the uncertainty or unfamiliar part of the process that people have with private money and hard money loans, which has especially been thrown completely out of whack when you're talking about the institutional money that has entered the market over the last 5 to 10 years, because they call themselves private money, hard money, bridge loans, RTLs, whatever, the new acronym is. The reality is their checklists and their underwriting guidelines and their processes are far more complex than an old school private lending company like ourselves. So they've probably been through this process and just have like word association, right? Where it's that I had a bad experience with a private lender once, so they must all kind of go this way. It's the underbelly of the industry on the financing side. The easiest way to head it off for us is to have that direct conversation with the listing agent and really understand their frustration. I would be pretty angry. I would be caught off guard if I was representing a seller and it was presented to me as all cash and now it's being changed to financing. I wouldn't like that. So having a little bit of empathy in that situation and going, hey, listen, I understand this is not really how, we prefer to have these conversations, but here's where we are in the process.
Over here. You don't want to start this shit over.
And
we're not going to say it like that. And I think it's also on the types of what is private money, hard money, asset-based bridge, RTL, institutional, alternative credit. The difference is the freaking marketing team. It's all one and the same, but it's like how far removed are you, so-called lender, from that final credit decision? And I think that's something all real estate agents can start asking if they're looking to vet lenders. Who is making the final credit decision? Is it you? Who is drawing the loan documents? Is it you? Who has the loan servicing rights to this loan? Is it you? These are slightly process-based questions that could help you back into that closing timeline. Another one, we did a post on it, closing in 10 days. We did on the last chat. Do you require an AMC or not? Doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad product or service. It's just about closing timeline. Then even as a borrower looking to vet new lenders, it's not necessarily about rate and leverage. It's process-based questions, and it's who's making that final credit decision. Most borrowers don't care. As long as you're going to fund on a Tuesday when you say you're going to fund, I'm cool with it until they miss the mark. And then underwriting parameters change. Then there's a new exception that comes out right before docs are scheduled to go out. And I think agents have seen this firsthand. A lot of real estate agents actually take deals down themselves. So they've seen it probably on the borrower side, and it's their reputation at the end of the day because they're sourcing these deals off market, which is why I want to throw the next kind of pivot your way.
Really quick, though, let me, not just going off of the question.
No, hard stop. I'm just kidding.
No, that's not how that works. Another process-oriented, it's a conversation, okay? It's not an interrogation. Another process-oriented question that I've actually talked to offices about will be more so along the lines of like, when do you start your review as a company, right? What we find with the big box companies that may do more aggressive loans, may have slightly better rates, there's a benefit if you have the time to sometimes working with those companies. The concern that needs to at least be discussed, at least in my opinion, and also in the feeling confident about the closing, is like, effectively you want to find out when human eyes get into a review position on a particular loan. And so with some of the larger lenders that are more institutionally based, that checklist has to be fulfilled. The loan officer is getting the deal in based on the parameters that they are aware of. and probably working under assumptions that as long as what the borrower is telling me is true, we should be able to hit those kind of loans, that loan amount, loan structure. You and I have been doing this long enough. Nothing against borrowers. They tend to look at things that are a little bit more glass half full. Here's the highest comp. I think my property can sell for that. We know as lenders, we're not banking our loan off of the top of the range. We're banking our loan off of a consolidated list of comps that really you and I can look at in a very short period of time. Institutional lenders are very driven by appraisal values and secondary valuations. If those things come in lower than what is expected in a cooling market, a market that's pulling back, a market that's plateauing, that's going to affect your loan amount. So the question becomes, when does a human get in and try to value that property? Like that, to me, that will kind of give you an idea of the likelihood or not of your loan amount changing. Because if you have an experienced person looking at comps, looking at the value of your property, if it's a fix and flip loan or rental property with market rents and so forth, stuff like that, you have a higher likelihood that the numbers you're being presented with on day one are not going to change. And that's where I would say you and I have, buttered our bread per se, because frankly,
Toasted. Yeah.
Slightly toasted, not too hard to kill the top of your mouth, that whole thing. But I would say I take an unhealthy amount of pride, I will admit it, an unhealthy amount of pride in making sure that our loan amounts on day one are as accurate as they can be. There are underwriting factors that can change that, whether it's borrower quality, liquidity, scope of work, condition of the property, especially if the property is not listed, so we can't see anything on listings for condition of the property and so on and so forth. But to the best of our ability, what I really want to do is try to hit that loan amount on day one so that our clients can go out and either allocate the money from their side, have that not change, or as we work with a lot of people who utilize private money and gap funding, they can go out and work on raising that money and that dollar amount doesn't change. Because as it is with us, if we come, I would say 2 or 3 days before docs and the borrower hits us with, can we raise our loan amount by 5%? That's not a good conversation to have. We've already kind of agreed where it should be. Why do you need 5% more? Is it preference? Is it a requirement? Is it a necessity? It's far easier to go from a higher percentage to a lower percentage by 5% than it is from a lower percentage to a higher percentage. So we know that if you extrapolate that mentality when you have borrowers working with private money, if they're going out and raising 150 and they secure the 150, if our loan amount changes, I know that it makes it extremely more difficult for them to go from 150 to 170 with those investors. It kind of gives that red flag of like, do you know what you're doing? Is your lender trying to screw you over? There's all these things that can go into it. If they went back and said, hey, I don't need 150, I actually need 130, that's not going to be a problem. Really won't be a problem.
Yeah, we see that with some borrowers, and I think we're seeing some more borrowers actually just have the liquidity to not need the gap funding. But it's a I don't know, it's a blend out there.
It's definitely not a preference. Not a preference.
Preference. I want 50% down. Let's call it.
Let's do it.
12-3, baby.
That's it, back in the day.
Shadiest thing you've seen on the purchase side.
Oh man.
In the last 6 months, I think I have a story you might talk. I don't know if you're going to talk about it. But I think God and Jesus was involved. But
so,
what's the shadiest thing you've seen on the front end? Probably sourcing deal off market.
Oh man, I mean, and again, we got to be somewhat careful here. I've been pretty vocal on social media about how I feel about wholesalers. So no offense to the good ones. How about that? And I'll let you. I will let the people who the half dozen people who probably watch this interpret who would be a good wholesaler and who will not be a good wholesaler. I still am confused about wholesalers. I think that we see agents wholesaling deals, which I don't understand how that is legal. The hairiest or the most peculiar situation that I've seen recently, I do understand, preface disclaimer, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Wholesalers have the ability to provide value. They can do with that value what they think in their mind is worth the amount of money that they're going to make. We saw during COVID, pre-COVID, 2018-19, wholesale fees that were so exorbitant that were very shocking and so exorbitant to a point where now, when you talk about institutional lenders or lenders that provide loans that are reliant on the secondary market, there are carve outs in the loan to values specific for assignment fees, which that's relatively new. 5% of the purchase price or up to $50,000 is something that I did a poll on LinkedIn and a guy was happy to share with me. So it's worked into it because you would like to think it's become something that is noticeable in the market. Gone are the days when people are making 5 or 10 grand on a wholesale fee or an assignment fee, which when you're talking about Southern California properties is a marginal cost from a loan to value, reasonable in my eyes for trading paper. And now you're seeing these assignment fees that are 30, 50, 100, 150,000. The ugliest thing that I saw recently was a wholesaler trying to sell a property to our client, and I believe the price was around $330,000 out the door to our client. And our client is very experienced with working with wholesalers. One of the things that we look at when we're closing a transaction that's on an assignment is what is the total consideration? Not what's the purchase price, not what's the total consideration to the seller, plus the assignment fee, plus the assignment fee, plus the assignment fee, right? It's what is the total consideration. And in this case, the price out the door to our client was $330 and change, I believe. And the price to from the seller to the wholesaler was like $172,000. Now, I can't say that I'm shocked by that. I've seen it before. We'll see it again. But the idea that a wholesaler should make more money than the seller effectively, if you take into account any mortgage payoffs and stuff like that, by that amount of money was a red flag to me. Now, what adds into this equation is the type of seller that you have. You have a seller that was in distress, husband just passed away, she's on the older side, and they're charging her this fee. And I think that there are limits to morality or ethics, right? Morale is and ethics are kind of a something that you are comfortable with. And some people may feel that they're more ethical than others. And that's their holy grail, right? But there's a limit to it. I mean, even when it gets ugly, it gets ugly. So my concern was for our client, which is, hey, this is not a $10,000 fee. I don't know how we go out to an investor on our side and justify the fact that these people are going to be effectively brokering a transaction as a wholesaler and making $170,000, and we're going to stand by and finance that. I don't think that that is something that we're interested in. I particularly like to sleep at night. And for me, I just brought that concern to the client. And so, not to speak too much on it, but effectively, the wholesaler wanted to jump on a call. And listen, man, I'm willing to talk to anybody. I am always, I like an interesting story. It doesn't make me any more interested in doing the deal, but I do like hearing it. And these guys were, veterans. Thank you for serving our country. Like, braver than most people in the world in general. And God-fearing people. Again, whatever your prerogative is on that, I want you to try to have a North Star and always point yourself in that direction. The concern becomes, she's elderly. And when questioned about the large wholesale fee, just telling me that they preyed on it just doesn't really sit well with me. I think that ultimately, if that deal closes in the way that it was supposed to close, the issue becomes the elderly person moves out. Some relative removed from her family is an attorney and asks her why she moved. She tells the whole situation and story and explains the sales price, shows the paperwork. Everybody gets sued in that situation for taking advantage of somebody, including us as the lender that helps. And so we just advise our client, listen, if they want to close it at that 170 price range, they should close it, have them transfer title to their name. They can close it with cash, a loan, I don't care. And if they turn around and sell it to you for $330, they're two different transactions. And listen, they'll make a lot of money still. There's enough juice in it to take on those additional transactions. That was probably the ugliest thing I've seen. And in
that wholesale situation, they're so If a real estate agent is representing a seller and there's an assignment, there is actually an
I don't think that
assignment
this one.
document car
I
form.
don't.
This is
I don't think this one was a real estate agent. Just
Yes, this is
always
off
clear.
market.
Yeah.
So then they're shielding that assignment fee completely. And it's going to be only on the buy side. They tend to hide it on the sell side so they don't get to see it. If a real estate agent is involved and is not the wholesaler, if they're doing it correctly, I think there's a car form for that. And
Hmm.
there's even an escrow addendum that escrow will have both parties sign. So
Hmm.
in this instance, if I'm thinking it's the same transaction, the first escrow was uneasy
Oh yeah.
about it and questioned it. The second escrow questioned it, and then they were on the wholesaler was like, "Hey, let's try this escrow, a third one." And
Yeah.
at that point in time, I think our borrower now he's too involved with their conversations and the structure of their wholesale fee to where now he is guilty by association if in the event it were to go sideways and something like that that would. It's
Well, not to
there's a fine
mention.
line. I'm not saying we're putting ourselves up on a pedestal, but I mean
No, I
that
mean, I
that
think
that one was pretty aggressive.
it's a sliding scale, right? I think what you're comfortable with, because our client literally said the deal makes sense for me at 3:30, and I said it might make sense to you at 3:30, but like, at what point are we enabling the behavior? And when you think about a wholesale deal, they lock it up in their name or their entity name, and then they have the open house, or they have the, I'm trying to not say too. I noticed I said that a lot on the last one, so I think I've cut them in half
But
today.
you haven't said honestly once, so
Not
that's good.
honestly one. Now that you said it, though. But the part was that I was getting to, a wholesaler will get a deal under contract in their entity name or in their personal name, whatever it may be. Then they'll open it up to the market, and whoever shows up at that house typically shows up with the wholesaler to walk it. And so now the question becomes, if the seller is there, the seller is sitting there engaging with a buyer who is buying a property for drastically more than they're selling it for. And listen, I understand value from a wholesale and an assignment situation. A lot of times, though, you never see an escrow say, "I don't think I'm comfortable with this." Maybe you see it once or twice. You rarely ever see it twice with two separate escrows, right? And that to me was reassuring to how we were feeling. And the client ended up passing on the deal. I think the reality is, if you're buying in your buy box and your return is relatively normal, then I'm not sure it's worth the additional risk to put you in a situation that might turn out negatively somehow, some way. Now, if the return was drastically higher, maybe you factor in some additional risk and it might be worth it to you as a buyer. But as us from a lender, like, we make a percentage. The percentage doesn't change. The loan amount sometimes does. It's never really worth it in our eyes to kind of cross an ethical bridge for one transaction, right? It's just not really worth it. And so that was made me feel uncomfortable. Let's just put it that way.
No, it's interesting, and not all wholesalers are the same. There's some really
Not at
good
all.
ones out there, but then there are the rest. Same thing with lenders. There's some great ones out there, then there are the rest.
Oh yeah.
But then they serve a purpose, and they're doing a lot of the grunt work, door knocking, generating leads to lock up these properties. But then some agents don't really like it because they'll lock up a property, and homeowners for a sub owner don't really know otherwise. One thing that, again, this is not legal advice. I'm not your attorney. You should consult with a real estate attorney. If that purchase contract is drafted with an assignee clause in there and or assignee, Corey Siegel LLC and or assignee, counter them and say no assignees. Just see what they say.
Right.
And just get that right out of there. Now you
Yeah.
have something that you could go, or hey, if they're going to assign it, ask them, are you a wholesaler or are you closing?
Oddly enough, that same client ended up passing on that deal. And fast forward maybe a month or two later, and he got under contract on another deal that was being wholesaled, and he shows up with the wholesaler to do the walk through the property. This one was being represented by an agent, and the agent, rightfully so, was like, "Who is this guy?" And our client is sitting there like, our client is sitting there going, kind of mumbling along because he
I'm
doesn't know
Steve.
he doesn't know what to say. He doesn't know what to say. And the wholesaler goes, "Oh, he's my partner." And you can imagine we've probably had that conversation in past lives as well, when you have people insinuating that you're something that you're not, and how uncomfortable it feels. And I'm the type of person who will correct in that situation. So our client said, well, no, I'm not their partner. Okay. I'm going to be buying the property. And the agent said, we're in a contract. I can't unilaterally cancel the contract. I don't like how this is sitting. And our client went back and had some requests for a price reduction. The wholesaler didn't agree to it. So he got out of that contract. Wholesaler was not able to fill the deal. But because our client showed up and that agent was able to talk to him about being an end buyer and how it wasn't able to sit well with him because of the wholesale thing, that agent called the client afterwards and said, hey, do you want to buy the property? Our client's offer went to where he needed it to be without the wholesaler, and the seller makes drastically more money. So again, I understand where wholesalers bring in value and be a resource. I don't know how often the seller benefits from that. Let's just put it that way. They benefit from the sale of the property. They benefit from getting out of a distressed situation, but I don't think they get the highest and best that they would get if it was being represented in a more traditional fashion. And I could be wrong.
Yeah, or just saying, hey, I'm gonna wholesale this for a higher rate. They'll be like, all right, what's that higher rate? But it's
part of the game.
It is what it is. You just gotta know what questions to ask, and that's what we try to do. Just kind of ask the questions, baby. Okay, I'm gonna hit you with some rapid fire.
Let's do it.
Some of them are gonna be one or the other, or what just comes to mind after you hear it.
Okay, really quick though, I did call the NBA Finals, so I got the matchup correct. I just want to say that.
Did you call the final though?
No, I don't want to do that.
But did you on the last one? I forget.
I just called it that it was going to be OKC in Indiana, and I was right. But I think OKC is going to win. So, of course, the one time I don't put any money on anything, that's when I'm right. So,
hey, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, rapid fire. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Leftover food?
Oh, yeah.
Steak medium rare or well done?
Medium rare.
Cold shower or hot?
That depends on the time of the day.
Hey, right now.
I'm not taking a shower right now. I'm doing this podcast.
Answer the damn question.
I'll say, hot. We'll go hot.
Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Participation trophies?
Oh, goodness. Don't get me started. No. No. Yeah, I don't want to do that.
That's all I got for you today.
That's all you got. Well, I'll give you another one that for any softball fans out there, the 4-up run rule or not. And I don't want to bore everybody with the explanation of that, but I coached my daughter's 6U softball team, and they changed the scoring rules on us in the middle of the playoffs, and I'm still salty about it. So it is what it is. It is what it is.
It's like T-ball, man. You can't have playoffs in T-ball. No one.
That's the first thing I said, and then as we started making our way, they changed the rules. One parent got upset. Rules changed for everybody. We lost.
I bet you that parent is a supporter of the participation trophy. So, because if you complain loud enough, you'll probably get what you want in some leagues. Just saying.
Got to make sure the losers always have a chance. That's all I'll say.
So I just need to know who to send this recording to at the end. Just tell them
man, I hope they see it. I hope they see it. We'll see. No. It was a fun season. All the girls wanted to play. That's the success. That's it.
Yep.
I asked who wants to play softball next year. All 13 girls raised their hand. They were excited. They didn't even realize they lost. That's how dumb the playoffs are at that age. And I said, it's been a great season. They said, wait, we don't have a game tomorrow? I'm like, no, we lost. And they go,
you lost.
Bummer. They go, oh, bummer. We lost. Yeah. So, but they all want to play. But yeah, man. So.
All right. Well,
until a couple weeks from now.
I'm not very good at goodbyes, so goodbye.
I'm not either. I'll talk to you later. Bye.